So I can suddenly think, maybe because I hopped around on my crutches a decent amount today and did like 1.5 yoga classes. I don't know, but I can think, therefore I'm breaking my whole schedule and staying up late because, like, I'm too happy to go to sleep. I've been in such a slump lately. Hands need to be visible because half of my communication is gestures. I was truly like born to speak sign language, but I don't. I think someday I will learn though, at least for Tokipona. Anyway, I've been in. It's an overall like plateau on my scale of my like personal growth and learning, and I'm so disgusted with it, and I'm so disgusted with it. So I'm happy to be thinking again. Maybe able to pull up a little bit, but yeah, like I've been. I don't know. I've sort of lost a lot of the naive, not naive in a bad way, but just like the innocent, like simple structure or like faith in the universal things and Christianity and that system, or just like a hopeful religious or spiritual like narrative, like universal narrative. I don't know. I've lost my immediate and like visceral sort of trust in that. Recently, I think it'll come back, but it's been more difficult to function in my everyday thought life because, as you think, a narrative of hopeful universal meaning and it is like very helpful to just everyday thought and like gives me a wider picture of the world and more creativity and more like confidence, even just pragmatically. So, which is evidence enough for something like that, existing. But yeah, I've been puzzling over a couple of ideas lately. I'm all distracted, and also I'm like happy, so I'm not, being Friedrich Nietzsche over here and wallowing in my slave morality. Actually, he wasn't into the slave morality, but making whole philosophical systems spun out of my own being pessimistic. It's sort of like, I should probably talk about this later, but it's like really seductive, quite, what's the word? Not sinister. Gets in easily. Because it's something like, I think, like being in a box. Like, let's say you are in a box, which basically in the modernity we generally are. Basically just like in a box all day, and outside there are the flowers, there's the sun and the stars, there's nature, there's beauty, etc., and like other people, but you're in this box. So to you, the world is just this box, and it's cold and empty, and reality has no good to offer, and etc. And it's like just from being trapped in there, but I mean, as long as you stay trapped in there, that's a sort of realistic view of reality and lines up with everything that you're observing, and yeah, it's hard to know when that's happening. I guess to an extent. It's always happening because of just the limitations on our perspectives. And I think the most out of the box moments are the ones of like joy and beauty and goodness. All of these are very easy things to say in one of those moments and difficult to like still be able to find my way along that path of thought and like reasoning in one of the box moments. Yeah. So it's like a false perspective from being blocked from reality. It is also similarly like, yeah, just noticing how much the condies and the climbing turns, which I've been obsessed with lately. I was listening to this climbing podcast and they called like footage of a climb they called footy. And this word has just been haunting my brain now. It lives rent free. I say at least 15 times a day. Footy. But anyway, the circumstances. Really, I don't know, like seeing and learning by experience how much circumstances change how I'm feeling and how I'm able to respond, like what I can do, like what I should do. As I suppose an antidote or counter principle to the whole there are no conditions, only weakness, to the whole like free will and overcoming circumstances. It's true that, for instance, if I'm alone and say I'm like trying to do some exercise and like trying to do some yoga routine, it's just I don't have the energy and the motivation to do it. Whereas if I'm in a class surrounded by a lot of other people doing the same thing, I'm going to. That's like just the energy is there and the motivation is there from them and from the condies, from the circumstances. Yeah. So similarly, in a boxed-in moment, I'm just gonna be able to drag around and not do everything. It does not mean that I am a fail human. It means I'm having, yes, we're recording, a bad day. And need to put off the ambitions for later. Just do what I can. Although then, paradoxically, when you start doing something, that also can generate some motivation to continue, like some energy to continue. So it's always a balance between like knowing when to just, okay, like relax and not worry about it versus push through and start the thing, and then this will get you into a good cycle of motivation. But yes, varying circumstances, varying moods, really it's going to be different what I can do, and I guess just being encouraged that I'm in well, I can't be sure of that. Be encouraged that I'm still like a youth. Most of this is just in my head. Yes. So be encouraged that like the circumstances will change for the better later, and I will be able to do more just by virtue of being in a better place. And when I'm in a better place, then I will be less thwarted constantly by myself from my own goals. It's difficult to be human, but especially not. It is difficult in a particular way to be like young and have so little life experience and like so few skills, especially like practical skills, or just or really an external life very much, but then just to be burdened by the weight of all of the knowledge. I think it's a good place to start from, but it'll be a lot better when things are more embodied and more manifested. It's just difficult. Difficult to start new things too, because I have my mind in all of the patterns and like in all of the high levels and in like all of 20 years into the future, and then, because, your mind can hold, because of the whole Gestalt thing and, like, how things can chunk down, and it takes, take, like, climbing, which, well, no, I sprained my ankle, so I'm on a hiatus, but hopefully going to develop some more base skills and patience during that time. However, so it takes just as much brain space, head space, for me to fit, like, some very high level concept, or, like, my plans to be doing this and getting better for the next 10 years and 20 years, or just some quite, like, theoretical thought, or, like, a certain technique or something. It takes as much space as, like, moving one limb in a very precise way and, like, totally failing and, falling. But that, so there's kind of levels to reality, right? There's, like, the meat realm, which is what I've unironically started calling it now, where things are more enfleshed and embodied and almost, like, slower in time, or, like, in the present moment. So that would be on the level of, like, being, I guess, in a flow state and just doing something in your own life. And then there's the more abstract realms of, like, the pattern realms of, say, stories that you hear, and you can fit basically a whole person's life in the form of a movie or a story in your head. And it takes the same, like, amount of space as just one, don't say as just one moment of, as, like, one, 5 minutes. Like, I ate my meal, great, hour, but I'm also, that takes up the same amount of space as, like this entire beautiful anime movie that I watched, which is, like, a whole world and a bunch of philosophical concepts, etc. I can hold all that in my mind, so it almost feels like a waste of time to go from that to, like, a half-decent beginner yoga session where I can criticize everything I'm doing and, like, see how very beginner it is. And it's difficult, therefore. It's difficult, especially in modernity, when we have all of this a pattern realmy, and the internet and just everything, so much information and so little more meat realmy connection in general. It becomes more difficult to have sort of a sense of coherency in life, I think, and, like, a coherent narrative and story of, like, this is who I am and this is what my life is about, and I'm gonna make, like, moving toward this and this and this and this way, because just, like, everything coming through, and you feel like a failure for not doing everything all at once, which is not how things work in the meat realm, but it is sort of how things work in the pattern realm. And I'm like, what are creatures? What are, oh dear, I've forgotten. What is it, Hamlet? Realm, crawling between heaven and earth. What are creatures such as we to do, crawling between heaven and earth? Something like that. It's a good quote. #relatable. Yeah. So that's, like, an interesting thing. It's you have to recognize that patterns are scalable, and, like, the same ones do apply across, an entire person's 20-year narrative arc versus the narrative arc of my day or my 5 minutes, or a nice little existential crisis in the middle of the day. But it's scalable in that the proper place to keep the pattern realm things and the other stories and the other, like, fictional worlds in their proper place relative to my actual life and who I actually am, and, like, to keep all that sort of feeding in and providing different perspectives on, and, like, giving material to, like, my own self, which needs to stay coherent and, like, needs to stay together and not just float off and be divided into all of this. And I guess that's partly, like, not living in fictional realms or comparing too much to other people's stories, and partly gaining, learning and like words and skills that are relatively easy for me compared to things that I'm trying to do now, mainly just getting more in shape and more of a like mind-body connection, and being able to, set into V1 without spraining my ankle. Yeah. So that was it. How long has this gone on? Okay, that was not what I was puzzling over. That was a different. I was gonna like make. Okay. Yeah, what I was. Popcorn. I have to get braces soon, so I'm eating all the popcorn now because I love popcorn. It's so good. I will say I basically just surrendered to my sweet tooth lately. I eat sweets when I want them, which is a lot. I mostly eat fruit these days, but I do have a high fiber diet. I guess I'm proud of that. That's a good thing. I try to at least keep that. At least. Very difficult because I really get so triggered by any kind of like discipline. I'm just like, no. Because I lived my whole previous 19, 20 years just enslaved to that. No, I just can't. I'm just like in total reaction against it. It makes it rather difficult to. But it's a good constraint. It's an interesting constraint. Anyway, the things I was puzzling over are, going back around to the problem of evil, death, and then, yeah, I guess it's death and the problem of evil. So, death as in, death and like the resurrection, because I don't really have, at this point, okay, I don't know. I've just been doubting everything. So therefore I don't just believe in it by default. And especially the concept of an individual human person coming back and having some sort of thing that's like our bodies, but better. It makes sense. Excuse me. I want to believe it, and I'm sure that as soon as some things more start clicking in my life, whenever that is, I'll be like, yes, of course, everything is true, everything is good. I'll just have like a lot of the energy, and I'll just be like, I believe it, everything is all gonna be perfect. But I think the world does make more sense, or at least I'm able to live better when I do assume that. However, I don't know, because it doesn't really work out practically. Like, okay. I mean, humans were not the only living things. They're not the only things in the world. And everything is subject to this. It's sort of like the Eastern religions say, it is always the two forces of like dissolution and then holding together. And it's both, and it's sort of always both. It almost has to be both. So I'm like thinking, again, I'm in a good mood right now, so I'm trying to get myself back into the pondering death mood. Thinking like it's, to me, I can say very easily, because okay, there's an argument like, well, everything, we have our time on the earth and we play our roles on the earth in this life and as ourselves, and then that energy dissipates, and like there's new people born and to take the place, like that's okay when you look at it as a whole. The different generations come and go. But if you've ever loved an individual person, I mean, there's something irreplaceable in that, in them, and that has the potential to, and really only can fully like flower if that individual sort of like unique, distinct soul or person or person is given forever to continue to develop. And it's like, to me, an undeniable tragedy for that to cease forever, and just like to be replaced by new people, because I don't know, I'm very similar to, say, my mom, but I don't not similar enough to replace her adequately. In fact, that's the whole point of children, is that to be healthy, they have to like split off and separate in identity from the parents. So it's like, I don't know. To me, sort of, it would be unacceptable for an individual, unique human being to just disintegrate forever and be remade into something else. You lose something that no. And, but, first off, there's plenty of people that accept that idea, and it's sort of naive, and it's also because in my position in life, I'm not in the position of like accepting death or disintegrate. Like, I'm at the Pierre Terre de Chardin stage of like where he talks about continuing to fight, I guess, the chaos or the dissolution until it is time to sort of surrender, when it's not that time for me. So of course I wouldn't understand, and of course it would be unacceptable to me. And then also, like, what about a tree or a flower or an animal, or like a unique animal, like a pet or something? And in a sense, those are all unique, irreplaceable beings that potentially could continue to flourish forever. And don't. They eventually die and are broken down and remade into something else. This is confusing, and I'm like, I do not want to accept that being the way of things. And I think if you start getting into, or like the way that I had justified it before, or explained it before, with something like a tree or flower, or I don't think you can honestly do it with animals because they have too much personality, but I've never had a pet that I was close to, so I do not know this. Yeah, is like something like angels or spirits, or kind of going up a level from, because, and I think this is the way to like solve it, or to see how, I don't know, because the thesis would be no, like, it's not, permanent death, it's a transformation into something better, and like what is good is always preserved, just changed, like under a different form. And whatever the resurrection is would be us, the humans, passing on to a different, and even as somebody grows up, they're no longer that child self, but the positive aspects, if they've grown up healthily, of like the joy and the, like whatever they were as a child, they're more so as an adult, so like it just continues, and that makes sense. Whereas even though like, in a sense, you can be a totally different person, but like that there's some kind of something that's continuous and stays. And I don't know how that would apply for like trees or flowers or animals and things, because it should. I mean, it's just very human-centric of me to be like, oh yeah, it's easy from my perspective to be like, well, trees, flowers, whatever, and animals especially, like whatever, but not really. But then it's like, do they all get resurrected? That doesn't really work. So I'm just thinking, I don't know. There is a thing, though, of like, if you take it, because the truth is that it's on the lower levels, the very meatiest of the meat realm levels, that death and change, which is kind of the same. A lot of this is just semantics. Isn't everything semantics? Truly, the phantom god behind all conflicts. I love you, CJDX. That's where the death and change occurs most, is on those lower levels. And if you only limit yourself to those very, very lowest levels, everything's just atoms in constant flux and constant change, and nothing holds together at all for any basically amount of time. So, then more and more as you maybe rise up, things are more permanent. And you can see continued identity growing and changing and transforming, but remaining the same under even all of the death and change and all that. So it's like, okay, maybe like, I think this is where like angels as patterns and like spirits, etc. comes in. I don't know, like, okay, going for a flower, there's like this thing of like tree nests that, gets instantiated and enfleshed constantly in different individual trees, which are always growing and changing and dying and being reborn, but it's being developed, but participating in that higher and like more stable identity. But then the question is, I don't know, there's still loss on some level, always. On some lower level, like you lose something. Like you lose that one particular tree. Which, if you love that one particular tree enough, even if that's like an unacceptable loss, so to speak. Like irreplaceable is what I mean. Irreplaceable, and like a tragedy. Like something that, shouldn't be, you shouldn't just go with it, if that's okay. I don't know. Of course it's, with people. I should revisit these ideas, and will, in my own head. I think viscerally the idea of the resurrection, as in the body being the meat realm, like manifestation of you, your logos, your identity, your name, the logos and identity and name of each individual soul, and I don't know, maybe like everything that's named, just like everything, somehow being continuing and being constantly developed and transformed. Like that feels right. It feels right. And I think it's, like whatever is there's no one way to frame it, but like whatever's going on is, oh no, Faith, no. I would say whatever's going on is fine and should be accepted. That's not necessarily true, because sometimes what's going on is a bad regime and you need to not accept it. Or it's just, created, because that's the whole Christian doctrine of like the fall, which is not shared by all religions, so there's legit ways to frame the world that don't have that as a part of it. And I guess that's the tension that I'm confused by here. I'm like, is this just the way it is and I have to accept it, or is it going to get better? And that's a continuous spectrum, because again, a lot of this just depends on the circumstances of my own personal life, which I think are going to get better. Could they please hurry up? Could I please hurry up and decrease my negative thoughts, though? because that would really, that's the thing that's gonna make things better for me. Which is both really good, but also a lot of responsibility and really stressful when I'm feeling alone and weak and not with a lot of good conditions and good energy to believe anything or like have any hope. I'm just like, I don't have it in me. But I have to have it in me if I want to escape this little box. So that brings me more to the other. So like one of them is just thinking about, I don't know, time, death, and change. Thinking about like, death and the possibility of resurrection, what that would entail, what it would mean. I mean, what does it mean to be a self? What does it mean? I sort of think I know, or like I have a concept of that. Then basically everything is a gestalt. Everything is a self, down to the tiniest like little atom. And it, again, I think if you know and love anything enough, you'll see that like it's irreplaceable. So how is it okay for it to be replaced? Is it truly replaced, or is it merely past? I don't know. Like it's easy to say for a cloud, this completely unique cloud that I see, and that then changes, and is erased from the sky and replaced with a different cloud. Oh, it's just replaced by another instantiation of like the logos of cloud, or like the angel or spirit of cloudness that is now in this new form, and that's great and fine. But what if that cloud is like a human being who is then broken apart and made into other human beings? I'm like, I don't like that. But I don't know, because I feel like, and also, okay, here's the main reason, I guess, why. Because there's so many people who don't, and yes, there's also so many plants, and so just so many things die. I don't know, it's not fair. So many people don't, they live tragic lives, short, that are just cut off randomly, and they have so much more potential to continue growing. Yeah. I mean, if you have a healthy view of the afterlife that doesn't, or like the resurrection that doesn't mean that you put off your own life now for the sake of later life, I think pragmatically there's no reason not to believe in, if you can, work up the faith. So that's the thing. I'm going to get back to it as soon as I can, because it really just works a lot better for me in my life to think that way. And sort of makes sense. I think to me makes sense, but I have doubts about, and I just, then it's like, it's clearly me who's ignorant. And the structure of the universe, that's fine. Except for, say, David Bentley Hart on the problem of evil in The Doors of the Sea. And people under, totalitarian regimes. You're not supposed to sit back and accept that. So, there's always the Enjolras counter-argument. Which maybe is just feeding my ego a little too much, though. I don't know. Whatever, in like a couple of years, or especially when I get very much older and wiser, I'll quite easily understand this a lot better, so it's no point breaking my brain over it right now. I don't have the necessary material to properly think about it right now. But, however, I do have the necessary material to think about hierarchies of goodness that spontaneously emerge in all fields, and make it necessary to always choose to be optimistic. So, is the other thing that I've been rather bothered by. It's just a part of the structure of reality that there's goodness and beauty, right, as transcendental concepts. And basically, in every area or domain that you can think of, I try to emphasize beauty because it just makes things go a lot smoother. But there is always a hierarchy of goodness or preference that sort of structures that. Split this up maybe in case people. If you really are interested in these topics, you might also be the kind of person who's interested to watch 45 minutes of it other than 15 minutes. I'm thinking that's not the primary deterrent from this video. There's a length. But it does make me feel lonely sometimes. I'm like, man, nobody thinks like me. No one understands. It's not true. But so there's I need to communicate better. But so yeah. As soon as you zoom in, it gets finer and finer. The best things, all the way down to bad things. So let's say, for instance, let's just say, okay, let me try to think of a real example because those are more engaging. Okay, let's say climbing, because back before this V1 boulder decided that I was not even good enough for it and sprained my ankle. I'm not even that mad because I know it's going to help me to develop more patience and hopefully better technique. So I'm really not mad. But before the said incident, I was using that as it was getting me up in the morning, and I would look forward to climbing because it was something that I enjoyed. So from far away, it would seem like that's a good thing, or a beautiful thing, and all one thing and to be desired. And then you kind of zoom in and get there, and then it's well, immediately that splits up also into, so you might say, okay, so we have today as the medium of interest, or domain of interest. And there is today as a whole reality in the beauty sense of different things happening, and it's seen in a more coherent way without picking it apart and making preferences, which is the best way to see it. But also, which is the thing to emphasize, I think. But then also, under that, and sort of structuring it and giving it a skeleton and what's necessary in order to make decisions and structure it, I don't know, is some priorities and goodness and hierarchy of preferences, etc. So let's say the top of that would be climbing session, and then meals. So much of my joy in life comes from eating. This is why I'm clearly this is sort of a warning sign for me when I just start just looking forward to the next meal. This is probably not a good sign, but that would be there. Or then say in the day I have a video that I want to watch or something. And then there's just the getting to the, walking through the heat to get on the bus to get to the gym. And there's down at the bottom, some bad incident or painful thing that happens, or just the slumpy moments of just sitting on the couch, what should I do next? I don't want to do anything, etc. So that's the sort of hierarchy of the whole day. Then you say, aha, however, I shall be climbing, and it will be so good. Then you get there, and then it's immediately, okay, well, that also splits into its own hierarchy, because there's the moments when I'm sitting there frustrated because I can't send the thing, and because I'm wearing out my very limited strength, or because of my technique, and mostly just moments of which was most of my sessions was honestly me just sitting there like, that is so bad. But so those would be like at the bottom, and then in the middle there's trying and the problems and like fairly enjoying it. And then at the top, when I actually manage to, send, or I'm just having fun and I'm just like in a good, but that is a smaller and smaller percent. And then if you even zoom that in, you can just zoom it in further and further. If you and say, okay, well, individually I'm on the climb. I'm like you just go ad absurdum. Yeah, just like landing a move is satisfying. And like that's a good hire. I don't know. You could just keep splitting it up into little categorizations of what's the best and good and then bad. And I think it's the thing for me has been being too much clung to those and to just trying to get to what's good. Or like get to what's best without which if I'm too hyper focused on that just leads to said zooming further and further in, and each good thing like becomes further and further away. It's like the Achilles thing with the distances. Like I'm in a good mood, but I'm also not thinking very clearly, am I? I should, probably make a more coherent. But yeah, so if you see what I mean, I have a drawing of like a square, like a wavy little square for the medium or overall gestalt thing that's going on, and then like a little pyramid for these preferences that emerge. But then so I think, the problem for me is just how this happens, and sort of it starts to feel like nothing is pure good anymore or nothing is pure good because everything is just all mixed up, and there's always, when you zoom in closer, there's like always flaws. But the antidote to that is balancing it out with a more beauty-based approach, because beauty simply makes things hold together in the sense of seeing the experience more as a whole that is good in like a deeper and more nuanced way, and just being able to see it as more of a whole and accept the good with the bad and all of that. And of course those are always relative categorizations, and it's all semantics too. Not all semantics. It was definitely bad to be on the floor clutching my ankle in pain. It's quite difficult to, quite impossible in the moment to make any other analysis of that than pain and trying not to pass out. No pain tolerance. But, yeah. So with these two, because it's also good to have. I mean, it's good to have things that I'm like looking forward to throughout the day. But as long as those are kept in a sort of higher level, overarching sort of series of like strings, series of like little like bright spots that are sort of holding on, but like not being impatient to get there, which requires a more cohesive sense of everything falling together. Basically, this is all just me trying to have be cheerful about hopping on my crutches down to the bus stop in the heat for like 15 minutes and just having very bad quality thoughts that are mostly like, this is miserable, this is miserable, this is miserable, this is miserable, this is miserable. Oh, clouds are nice, this is miserable, this is miserable. And I'm like, what is this? This is not how to think. Of course, you can also reverse the whole goodness thing, because then you just splice off if all that exists, if we put ourselves into the box, like all that exists is that little traverse from the house to the bus stop, which is really what it would be to live in the moment. But this is a goal that is clearly not happening for me right now, so I'm just trying to approximate it. But, like, then the ultimate good would be that, like, cloud, and then that's better. This made no sense. Or at least I did not adequately communicate what's in my head. And it's interesting what's in my head. But it's not happening tonight, so save it for later. What did I say? Conditions and circumstances determine the amount of energy that I have. And this is okay. And it doesn't mean that reality is horrible or that I'm horrible, merely that it's a bad time. Of course, the question is, will the bad times ever end? And what if they don't end and, like, I have to be doing better before the bad times end, but I can't because it's bad time. It's that kind of thing. And then death and resurrection, that means tone. It's the tone. And so they'll show like a bug, landing on somebody and then flying away, and like drawn in beautiful detail with just like flowers and like things sparkling in the sun, or of course the food, which everybody says, all of like the food compilations, and just like it's so good. Like that is, I think, the kind of lens. Speaking of boxes and hierarchies and how we frame things and the conditions and also internal perspective determining so much about how good the universe seems. I guess is how to tie all of this together. Speaking of all of that, it's like a lot of it is the lens that I choose to look at things through, and good anime movies provide a very, very good lens, like balanced and healthy, and it feels right.